Hello everybody, welcome back to the, I'm making the camera wobble. Stop touching the table, Jonathan. Hello everybody and welcome to the live stream again from me, Jonathan Downham. For those of you that don't know me, I'm an advanced critical care practitioner here in the UK. And I'm doing these streams quite regularly now on a Friday to help others in critical care learn some of the basics that they need to help them move forward. So we've covered a bit of mechanical ventilation so far. We're going to continue that theme today, talking about some of the equipment we use for intubation. So, but before we do that, I just want to talk about my other resources that we've got, which you can see alongside me here. Yes, here. So we've got my website, which is criticalcarepractitioner.co.uk. We've got my podcasts over on iTunes and any other podcast you like. I'm up to, 160 episodes now, I think. I've found that a very useful resource. You can go, if you go to my website, you can go to the resources page where I also have products which I sell to help me maintain all this equipment that I've got in front of me, and I have got a lot of equipment now. I've just bought a new camera, so hopefully you're going to be benefiting from that as well. I have to pay for hosting, etc. So this is none of this is cheap, but those resources, I've made lots of videos on mechanical ventilation, for example. We've got a course called Mechanical Ventilation, which you can purchase at the moment for £27. I've left it discounted for another week, so if you wanted to go there, you're welcome to have a look at it, and it comes with a guarantee. If it's not for you, you can email me with no reason given and just say you want your money back. And if you do that within 14 days, you will get your money back, no questions asked. You can also follow me on Twitter at @CCPractitioner. I'm quite active on Twitter. If you want to message me at all, that's probably the quickest and easiest way to do it. The other thing I want to tell you about is the Facebook page, which I've called Critical Care Skills with the Critical Care Practitioner. This is where these live streams will be going eventually. I've not decided yet. There's already over 100 members on there, so it's a community that is growing quite quickly, quicker than I thought it would, if I'm perfectly honest, which I'm really pleased about. And eventually, hopefully, I can get people talking to each other as well as just talking to me. So those are the things that are available for you now. But let's get on to the subject in hand. So let me just first of all get the right camera. You can have me in all my glory. There you go. So let's talk about the subject in hand. Let's talk about intubation equipment and the kind of equipment that you will need when we have decided that we are going to intubate our patient. And we'll try and go through in some kind of logical flow. So the first thing you're going to need is one of these. This obviously is a face mask. Mine's a bit deflated, unfortunately. It's got a hole in it, which I've only just discovered. So you're going to need a face mask, and this is going to have to be sized appropriately to the patient. The best way to do that is just to fit it over their nose and then over their mouth and make sure that it covers both, and you want to get a nice tight seal. One of the reasons for doing this, or the main reason for doing this, is that we need to wash out the nitrogen from the patient's system, which is a gas that we don't use at all, and 79% of the air that we breathe has got nitrogen in it. So we're storing a lot of useless nitrogen in the functional residual capacity in our lungs. If we can get rid of that nitrogen and replace it with oxygen, then we've got longer to intubate the patient before those saturations start to drop. So what will happen is that the person doing the intubating will place this over the patient's face and keep a nice tight seal on it and ensure that the patient breathes 100% oxygen for preferably at least 3 minutes. And really we need to get those sats as close to 100% as we can, because that will give us longer to actually be able to ventilate the patient. The next thing you're going to need, which is under my desk here, is one of these. Now, not necessarily this type. I don't have what's called a water circuit. I must get one, but very similar to this. This is the self-inflating bag, but the water circuit is the green one that fills with oxygen, and you have a valve on it, so you can tighten or untighten the valve so that you can aid the patient's ventilations and perhaps give them a bit of PEEP on top as well, which if they're about to be intubated, they're probably going to need. you need to make sure that that is attached to oxygen. And if anyone still has them, make sure that it's not air that you're attached to. I don't think there's many that do now. Give the patient, if they're breathing for themselves, you don't necessarily have to do any breaths, but just keeping that tight seal with the face mask as well is going to be very valuable in keeping those saturations up. I'm not going to talk about the drugs in this one. We'll perhaps do that on another occasion. But let's assume now we've given the patient their drugs and we're ready to start the process. The sedation's been given, the paralysing agent's been given, we've waited an appropriate length of time for that paralysing agent to work, and the person doing the intubating says, yep, I'm ready now to have a look. So we've got the patient in the right position, and again, I'll talk about this on another occasion. I think what I'll do one day is go through the whole process of intubation. There is a page on my website, I've just put a post on there about intubation and the process that we go through, so you're welcome to have a look at that. It's the latest post, I think, but perhaps I'll do an actual video on that as well. One of these sessions could be that. It might be a bit longer, but I think in order to get everything it would need to be. So right, we're ready to intubate now. So what we need next is one of these, and I'm going to switch to another camera because I think it would be useful for you to be able to see it a little closer. So this is the laryngoscope. You can see it's got a Mach 3 blade on it. The laryngoscope should come apart, he says. Maybe this is the kind that doesn't. Oh no, this is the kind that doesn't. Okay, so this is a disposable one, so actually this blade doesn't come apart. This is a Mach 3 blade. You've got your power source stored in here, the batteries are in there, and then when you open it, you should have a nice light at the end there. Sorry to dazzle you. These used to be little bulbs that you could screw in and screw out a long time ago, but that's not something we have now. It is a very specific shape as well. You can see the shape of it. It's obviously anatomically shaped, so it goes along with the curve of the mouth. And the whole point of this is really to get this end down here, down behind the epiglottis, so that when the person intubating pulls the whole system up, that you will be able to see the vocal cords. And it's got this channel underneath it, because what's going to happen is that the person intubating is going to put it into the patient's mouth, is going to gather the tongue under this groove here, and then push the tongue to one side as they lift forward as well. So it is a very specific shape for a reason. Mach 3 I see used less commonly now. What I more commonly see is the Mach 4. So if you can see the slight difference in the length of the blade, you can see the Mach 4 actually goes all the way down to the bottom of the handle, whereas the Mach 3 goes a little less further. I often see the Mach 4 being used rather than the Mach 3 these days. It always used to be the Mach 3, it seems to be the Mach 4 these days. And that's certainly the one I always go to when I'm intubating somebody. Okay, so you need to make sure that they work, so you're going to be flipping them open and making sure that that light is nice and bright and there's no flickering. If there's flickering, get rid of it, use another one, because what we don't want is a non-dependable laryngoscope when we're trying to intubate the patient. The person doing the intubating will have this in their left hand, so pass it to their left hand. What will often happen is that they'll just look up and you will pass it into their left hand. They'll put that down and then they'll put the tube down with their right hand. Okay, so that's that. The other thing that we're going to need, and I've jumped a few steps, I've just realised, the one thing that's really important is we're going to need one of these. For us, this is an end-tidal CO2 monitor thing, gadget, I'm not sure what you call it, but this goes in line. So this is, you've got your ventilator, and eventually your tube will be on opposite ends, and you could possibly see, if I can get it to focus. No, it's not going to focus, it's focusing on me. But inside is a tiny little channel there that picks up the CO2 and then takes that CO2 down this tube all the way down to the monitor, which eventually will give us a number and will show the CO2 waveform. If you are interested, next week I'm going to do end-tidal CO2 tracing. So if you want to come and join me next week or listen on the podcast, this will be on a podcast which will be put on the website as well. Then you can join me next week or listen to the podcast. Okay, so having skipped a step, unfortunately, we now get to one of the key pieces of equipment, and this is the ET tube. So this is a size 7, which I think you can see on there. It's back to front, unfortunately, but trust me, this is a size 7. And there's a number of features of this tube that are quite important to its function. If you can see at the end here, and if I can get it so you can see it properly, I can put my finger, there it is. You can see there's a little hole there, and that's called the Murphy eye. And the reason that's there is just in case it blocks. So if you're listening on the podcast, right at the end of the tube, near the tip, you've got a hole on the side of the tube, which is called the Murphy eye. And that's just an extra resource in case the actual end of the tube blocks. And you'll also notice, if I can get it at the right angle, you could also notice that the end of the tube is actually beveled. It's not flat. And the reason it's beveled like that, the main reason is that when the person putting the tube down the patient's airway, if that was completely flat, it would almost obstruct the view of the cords. So cutting it off an angle like that means that you can actually see the cords a little bit better. So that's the purpose of that. It also makes it less likely to sit against the wall of the airway and blocking the tube. So then we get to the balloon at the end. So this balloon, obviously very, very important. It's not for holding the tube in, as some people seem to think. It's got no purpose in holding that tube in at all. Its purpose is to inflate and sit around the wall of the airway to make sure that any air that we put in then won't just come straight back out again, because without the balloon, that's exactly what it would do. So you need to inflate that balloon before we start the process, and you inflate that using the pilot balloon at the end. So that blue thing that's attached right at the end that you stick your syringe on, it's spring loaded, so you need to press in reasonably firmly and just inflate that balloon and make sure that there isn't a leak. We do get leaks occasionally with these, so we need to make sure that that is working appropriately. Going all the way through the tube from one end to the other is this blue line, which I think you can see there, and that blue line is a radio opaque line. So that ensures that we can, or makes it easier to see the tube on X-ray once we've actually intubated the patient. You've got these markings all the way up, which I appreciate are back to front for you on the camera. I'm not sure why, but they are. But anyway, they are markings in centimetres, starting on this one from 16 all the way up to 28. Some people cut their tubes before they put them in. Some people cut them after they've put them in. But generally, they're going to be used to tell you how far that tube is in and whether it's moved if you move the patient at a later date, for example. So once you've put it in, and you can see those markings, there you go, that's nice and clear, isn't it? You can see those markings. You will then mark that on your ITU chart, and you will know if that tube has moved. And something like 22, 22, 24, something like that at the teeth and lips is probably appropriate, because one thing you don't want to do is put it in so far that it actually goes down the right main bronchus and you're only ventilating one lung. So the other thing that's on it is obviously the size. So we can see here the size of the tube is a size 7. And the size relates to the internal diameter. So if I take this connection off, the plastic connection at the end is a 15mm connector. Again, that's the internal diameter, which will connect to your ventilator, and you can take that out. You just twist it and it pulls out. If you are going to cut the tube, obviously that's going to have to come out, and if you do cut it, I would recommend you cut it slightly obliquely, because it makes it much easier to get in, and sometimes that can be done in a bit of a panic if the tube becomes disconnected, or if this 15mm connector comes out, and then you can just stick that back in. The two black marks here are what the intubator is looking for when they are putting that tube into the patient, and you're trying to get the black mark past the vocal cords so that you know that you're in far enough but not too far. Okay, so you're getting past that first black mark through those cords, and then you know that you haven't gone too far, and hopefully you should be able to ventilate the patient appropriately. Okay. Another piece of equipment that you may or may not need is this one here, and I'll switch to the webcam for this. So this is your Bougie. So your Bougie is a very useful piece of equipment. It's, I don't know, what's that? Probably about 1 meter long, I would think, maybe a bit less. But essentially this is going to help you intubate the patient, or help the intubator intubate the patient when it becomes a bit difficult. Sometimes getting the ET tube around a bit of a corner can be a bit difficult, and twisting it sometimes helps that, but sometimes even then you can't get the ET tube down. So often what the intubator will resort to is your bougie. And this bougie can be bent a little. It's not completely bendable, but it can be shaped slightly. Some of the ones we've got at work at the moment I think are a bit cheap and are quite hard to bend and keep in shape. But this one, if you bend it reasonably firmly, you'll often see the intubator doing that because they want to bend it so that it can get round the corner and find those vocal cords. Okay, this end here, and I'll go back to the other camera for that. This end here is called the Kuday Tip, so you can see that it's at a 30-degree angle, and that is what's going to go into the patient. So just make sure that you pass it to the person doing the intubating the right way round. What they don't want is this end first, because then they're going to have to kind of twist it round and go round to this angle. So once we've got it in, once we've got this in, what's going to happen is that the intubator is going to say, right, I've got that in now, so what I need you to do now, as the person helping me, I'm the intubator, I've got hold of the bougie, I'm not going to move it, you're going to feed this over the top until it goes all the way through, and then you're going to get hold of the bougie at the top end, and you're going to tell the intubator that I've got the bougie, okay? So he can let go of it then, and he's going to then just going to twist it and put it in, and hopefully eventually, if I can get it in shot, I'm not tall enough, get it in shot, he's going to eventually just feed that over the bougie and through the cords, and then he'll say bougie away. You take the bougie away, and hopefully that is the patient intubated. You also will need, you'll also need one of these. I should have said this at the start. I haven't done this in a very good order, have I? You're going to need, and we're all very familiar with these, this is your Yanker sucker. Make sure that that's ready to go. More often than not, the intubator, or certainly I do, and I think many people do, want it tucked under the pillow next to the patient's head so that he can use it if he needs to, because one of the first things you might need to do when you use that laryngoscope and open that patient's mouth, see lots of secretions at the back, and you're going to need to suck those secretions out before you're going to get yourself a decent view. So that's the Yanker sucker. And then finally, you may need one of these. Okay, so this is your supraglottic airway, and I'll go to the other camera first so you can see it better. So this is the supraglottic airway, otherwise used to be known as an LMA. Now they're commonly known as iGels, so you can see the iGel there. And this can rescue you if you can't actually get down the cords. If you can't intubate the patient properly, it may be that we'll resort to an LMA instead. And this doesn't go through the cords, it kind of just sits above the cords and blocks the esophagus. So this is the esophagus, if you like, and the cords would be here at the front. This end is blocking that esophagus, and this is sitting above the cords, and hopefully we'll be able to ventilate the patient using those. A feature of this to know about, again, we've got the 15mm connector here, which is exactly the same as the one I showed you earlier, and they are quite solid at the top here, and the reason for that is it's just in case the patient bites down on it, they can't actually block the iGel. You're going to need to grease this quite heavily on the back for it to be able to slide down quite easily, and the technique for this really is you're supposed to use a pen grip, so you just kind of pop it in until you don't feel any more resistance, and hopefully it will sit in the right position. This doesn't have a balloon like the old ones used to. The old LMAs had a balloon, these don't. They're just made of this plasticky, quite flexible substance, so you won't need to inflate these. Hopefully you won't need one of these. Hopefully as well you're not going to go to Plan D. Plan D can be quite scary. That's front of neck access. If you want to know about Plan D, I would go to the Difficult Airway Society page, and there is a video on there that you can access that shows Plan D in action, which is when really we can't ventilate, we can't intubate, and what we're going to have to do is find the patient's cricothyroid membrane, which on me is there, and we're going to have to cut it and put a size 6 tube down. If you want to see that in action, go to the Difficult Airway Society page, and you will be able to see it. So that is just a lot of the equipment. I'm just having a look at chat, just bear with me a second. Okay, so yes, Alpha Teacher says we always use a Mac 3 here in the US. Okay, that's interesting. We rarely do here in the UK now, certainly in my experience anyway. It's almost always a Mac 4. The other thing that you might have as well with one of these is you might have slightly different types of blades. You can get McCoy blades. McCoy blade is one with a little kind of trigger on there that will flip this end up, which can sometimes help get that epiglottis out of the way. You can also get ones with very straight blades, but this is the one that's used routinely when we are intubating our patients. You can get ones with smaller handles as well, stubby handles they're called, because sometimes with, let's say, obese patients or ladies with quite big breasts, what you do is you go down and it's actually quite difficult because the handle gets in the way on the chest to be able to get the blade of the laryngoscope in. So a stubby handle will often help. Yeah, Jacqueline, one with a small video screen. I suspect you're using the McGrath then, and I love the McGrath. It's a lovely handle. It's got disposable plastic blades on it with a tiny little screen off to the side, and I love them. More often than not these days, we will almost always have video laryngoscopy to one side if we don't use it first. If we think we're going to have problems with the airway, we'll use the video laryngoscope first. But often we will almost always have it ready and handy. Yes, Jacqueline, it's a lovely, and if you've ever held it, it's really nice to hold as well. I love the McGrath. There's something we use called the CMAC as well. Now the CMAC is slightly different in that you've got the handle, but the screen via a fibre optic scope is off to one side, so that it's great for teaching because everybody can see what you're looking at. And it's also useful if you're a little less experienced and you've got your consultant behind you, or you're attending in America, you've got them behind you and they can give you some guidance as to perhaps, come out a little bit, go in a little bit, pull forward a bit more, perhaps a bit of pressure on the cords might help. So I hope that's useful. Next week, as I say, end-tidal CO2. Thank you for joining me again. I'm enjoying doing these. It's keeping me up to date apart from anything else. And like I say, there's other resources on my page, criticalcarepractitioner.co.uk, or go to the podcast, or see this on YouTube. Thanks for joining.